Hello and welcome to Farm Connections. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. On today's episode, we welcome the changing season and visit Willows Keep Farm to check out their freight farm and discuss industrial hemp. We discuss wheat with the Executive Director of the Minnesota Association of Wheat Growers, Charlie Vogel, and the University of Minnesota Extension brings us a new best practice. All here today on Farm Connections.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections made possible in part by
Alcorn Clean Fuel, a farmer-owned renewable energy producer in Claremont, Minnesota for more than 20 years, producing ethanol, high-protein livestock feed, and corn oil for resale to benefit its members and their communities. Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility, produces 115 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood.
Back in 1944, Sam Bauer had a vision to provide tires and heating oil to families. This second and third generation family-run business is still focused on commercial truck, retread tires, tires for your passenger vehicles, and farm equipment too.
Novel Energy Solutions, committed to working with farmers and landowners to deliver a new crop, electricity. More about income potential and lease agreements designed to be top performers at novelenergy.biz.
Farm Connections traveled to rural Zumbrota to meet up with Ted Galati at the Willows Keep Farm. Ted, welcome to Farm Connections.
Hey, nice to see you, Dan.
What a nice place. What do you do out here anyway?
So we've got a farm. It's a viable farm, but out here we actually grow industrial hemp, and then we've got a haunted attraction that we have during the fall season.
Well, sounds like you're an entrepreneur.
Well, that's what I call myself, an entrepreneur. Yes, definitely.
Well, I'm thinking this farm maybe went through some transition. It looks like a dairy farm at one time and a dairy barn behind us. Can you tell us anything about the history of the farm?
Yeah, so the farm goes back to about 1919. And that willow tree that we have on the property, that's probably right from the start. That's why we called it Willows Keep Farm. And it was a working dairy farm. At one point probably had a lot of acreage, and then it's just kind of been cut up and chopped down. So we've got 9 acres out here now that we utilize.
Right along Highway 52.
That's right on Highway 52.
Well, when you bought the farm, you were kind of thinking about what can we use this farm, how can we transition it into the current days because it no longer was a viable dairy farm. So what went through your mind when you bought it?
Yeah, so we had been doing our haunted attraction at the History Center of Olmsted County, and we had run that there for 4 years, and I was in the process of looking for a property that we could call our own. Just because we would go in there, we'd set everything up, we'd run it for a month, and then we'd have to tear everything down, store it all, and every year we're doing that. And I had always driven by this property. I was like, that's a really cool house. What could we use it for? And it just happened that I saw a sign go up. It was on the market. We came in here, we toured it. I said, this could work fabulously for the haunted attraction. So that's what really brought us here. And then we also were able to grow our own pumpkins. We were able to have a corn maze and make it more of a family activity, just not an attraction about haunts.
Well, you had mentioned that you raised corn, but I don't see a lot of corn now. What another transition perhaps?
Yeah, so for the first 3 years we had a corn maze on the property, and we just got to the point where I was kind of like, what else can I do? And I started doing some research. Lo and behold, I looked up and I said, hey, industrial hemp. Let's think about growing some industrial hemp and cutting a maze into that. And then that's how we got into growing the plant out here on the farm.
Ted, you found a way to make some money off industrial hemp, but is there a market for the product in other ways?
Yeah, so when you think about industrial hemp, it is a cannabis plant. And I know people think about, marijuana, and there's this negative connotation about that. I think people are laxing a bit with that now, and we see legalization in states throughout the country. And maybe eventually that'll be nationally legal, but right now we're talking about industrial hemp. And industrial hemp, it's a cousin of the marijuana plant. It's not marijuana. It's like taking a pug and comparing it to a timber wolf. They're same species, but they're very, very different. And that's what this plant is. It's different. It's used in different purposes. It can be used to shelter you, to clothe you, to feed you, and to heal you. And not many other plants can do that. This plant, it can be a building product. You can turn it into denim. Like Levi Strauss, it wasn't cotton, it was industrial hemp. That's what they made the jeans out of.
Well, and certainly the farmers, miners, and others, loggers, needed something durable because it's hard work.
Oh yeah. And then you also have to think about this plant too. I mean, this country wouldn't have developed as such with the ships from Europe coming in. During the colonial days, they used industrial hemp for the sailing, for the sails on the ships, for the rigging. That's where the word canvas comes from. It comes from cannabis. And without that, we wouldn't have had the maritime, we wouldn't have had the trading, we wouldn't have had the development of this country.
Some great history.
Oh yeah.
Earlier when we were visiting, you actually mentioned thousands of years back.
Oh yeah, so this plant was one of the first plants agriculturally grown. So we're talking back in the Middle East, and there's records of it going back 5,000 years. And they were using it, again, for food. They were using it for the fibers, for rope, for clothing, all those type things. And it's just in the last 81 years that it's fallen into prohibition with marijuana. It's gotten this negative connotation, this negative name, and really it's something that we probably should have continued to grow here in this country and been able to process it and use it for those industrial purposes.
So Ted, this is a relatively new crop in our time period. What requirements, permitting, and other things are needed?
Yeah, so if you're a farmer that's thinking about transitioning to growing industrial hemp or maybe converting some of your land to industrial hemp, you do need to register with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So there is a licensing and permitting process that you have to go through. And it depends on how much acreage you want to grow. If you want to grow under 5 acres, then it's $350. And if you want to do a larger plot, it's going to cost you $500. And really what that does is it regulates it to an extent because they are going to be measuring the total THC in the plant and making sure that it's below 0.3%. If it's above 0.3%, you do have to destroy your crop. And I don't think crop insurance is going to pay for that.
I'm sure not. And we do see some headlines of some people that have had their permits removed and some legal action taken.
Yep. But I mean, looking at if you're a farmer and you're thinking about seriously getting into industrial hemp, one of the things I would really encourage you to do is research and find out what you want to grow your crop for. Because if it's CBD production, it's different. If it's grain production, it's different. If it's the hemp fiber, it's different. These plants, again, they have different qualities, different characteristics with the different varieties. And it's going to take, different planning, also the processing. Right now, we don't have somewhere to process for fiber in the state. So you're looking to take your product out of state, which can be spendy. So it's one of those things you really got to think about before you just put it in the ground.
In thinking about climate and weather, we've had some challenges this growing season. Has that given you issues with the plant?
Yeah, so our plant, we have a 4-acre plot that we usually put the plant into, and we planted early. The agronomist said, hey, if you plant it early, it'll be taller. Well, we got hit with 8 inches of rain and it drowned our aspirations. So it is one of those things where you have to kind of be, just like any farmer, you have to kind of look at the weather and plan accordingly, and hopefully, you don't have those occurrences. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. But it is difficult now without crop insurance. Now, hopefully that will change in the future, but if you lose your crop, you lose your crop. And you got to start over again.
It's your loss, it's your money.
Yep.
And no insurance to cover it.
Correct. And the other thing too is I think people think, oh, it's a weed, because that's what they think industrial hemp is. It's not a weed. You don't just throw it in the ground and expect it to come up. It's something that you got to nurture, you got to take care of, especially when you're going for high CBD. Those plants, total different ball game. We're prepping a field right now where we're putting a cover crop of white Dutch clover and bluegrass in to get that started for next year. And we will be digging rows into that crop, and we'll have plants 4 feet apart, which allows ventilation through it, which allows you to tend to each plant individually. It's a lot different than just putting in a stand of corn or soybean.
Thoughts about other uses going forward?
Yeah, so other uses going forward, I mean, really people have to think about, what does the future hold for us all as farmers with industrial hemp? And, whether it's bioplastic or whether it's, even looking at the plant for paper production. I mean, right now we grow trees and we cut down those trees. It takes 30 years for those trees to grow. Where you can put this crop in and within 90 to 120 days you can have not only the beautiful seed heads or the flowers on the plant, but that stalk. That stalk is 70% hurd, which is the wood of the hemp plant. And that can be processed into paper with less chemicals than when you take down a tree. And it's just ridiculous that we, take all that land to grow these trees, and the paper's not superior to the hemp paper. The hemp paper is actually superior.
How about organic production?
Yeah, so if you're growing for either CBD or for the grain, you're going to want to have organic field. You don't want to, you don't want to put it on a field that you've had necessarily corn growing on. So you're going to want to let that, field basically sit without sprayed chemicals on it for 3 years before you actually plant for either the feed or for the CBD production.
You had some great information. Is there a website where we could learn more, or where do you go for research?
Yeah, so we do have a website. It's hempmaizeminnesota.com. That's got information on there, but I would just suggest that you do a lot of research. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture, definitely go on their site and just look up either hemp or hemp pilot project. Even though it is legal to grow in all 50 states now, each state has to have regulations set up and approved by the USDA. So you would want to start with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture.
Good advice. Thank you, Ted.
Hey, thank you, Dan.
Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
Farm Connections Best Practices, brought to you by
This is Brad Carlson, Extension Educator with the University of Minnesota Extension. Welcome to our Best Practices segment. Today we're going to talk about fall nitrogen decisions. There's been a lot of focus on best management practices for nitrogen in the last few years on account of water quality issues in Minnesota. It's the time of year when we're thinking about making nitrogen management decisions for the coming year. Obviously, with it being in the fall, we think about whether or not we're going to be doing fall nitrogen applications. First and foremost, if you're in southeastern Minnesota, in the part of the state where we have lush soils that overlie limestone, in a lot of cases they're shallow, we don't recommend fall application of nitrogen at all. The exception to this would be some manure applications, but you do need to be careful with how you make those and where you make those. In the south central part of the state where we have heavier till soils, we do say that making fall applications of anhydrous ammonia with a nitrification inhibitor is an acceptable practice. The thing you need to think about most with making fall nitrogen applications is preventing its loss before the following growing season. In general, nitrogen needs to be in its nitrate form before it's lost, and all the loss processes are water driven. In addition, the conversion to nitrate is a microbial process, and so for that reason it also drives on heat. Similar to how you would put leftovers in your refrigerator, we look at not applying nitrogen in the fall until the soil temperature has gone below 50 degrees in order to slow down this microbial action and reduce the chances that the nitrogen we apply turns into nitrate and therefore is subject to loss, primarily in the springtime, early in the season prior to planting. It's for this reason we recommend using a nitrification inhibitor when we apply nitrogen in the fall. Nitrification inhibitors work on the microbes in the soil to try and slow the conversion of nitrogen into nitrate. Research conducted by the University of Minnesota has shown consistently in southern Minnesota that a nitrification inhibitor will pay off. Not always, because it's kind of pending the exact weather conditions, but on average you are going to see enough benefit out of it, it's worth doing. Consequently, the environmental risk of not using it is significant enough that we recommend not applying anhydrous ammonia unless you are using a nitrification inhibitor with it. Another area there's been a lot of focus on the last several years is the use of urea in the fall. This is not a recommended practice. The reason is that urea is a neutral molecule that is water soluble, and urea can move in the soil without converting to nitrate first. In addition to that, anhydrous ammonia, because of its sort of caustic nature, it has high pH, it's very cold, and it is hydrophilic, it attracts water, has the effect of inhibiting the microbes that convert the ammonium into nitrate. Urea doesn't have this effect, and for that reason the conversion to nitrate happens fairly rapidly after application. Research has shown consistently across southern Minnesota that the fall application of urea typically is not recommended, and we see reduced yields and increased losses in nitrate both through tile lines as well as potentially through denitrification in cases where we've got saturated soils. The way we manage nitrogen has come under a lot of scrutiny the last several years, and in particular the way we manage fall applied nitrogen has really been under the microscope. It's very important if you're fall applying nitrogen that you do it correctly. You wait until the soil temperature is below 50 degrees and you apply only anhydrous ammonia with a nitrification inhibitor. And in addition to that, if you're in southeastern Minnesota, avoid fall applications altogether. This is Brad Carlson, Extension Educator with the University of Minnesota Extension. This has been our Best Practices segment. Thanks for watching.
We're in Chanhassen, Minnesota, with the Farm on the Arb event at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. And with me is Charlie Vogel. Charlie, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. And also, you're the Executive Director of Minnesota Wheat Growers and Council, correct?
That is correct.
What does that mean?
Oh, that's Minnesota Wheat is two separate organizations. The Minnesota Wheat Promotional and Research Council is just what the name implies. It's focused on promotion and research. It's funded through a checkoff program of every bushel growers sell in the state of Minnesota, 2 cents per bushel. Funds per month looking at research. It's really started back in the scab days on developing varieties to help farmers grow a crop that was resistant to scab, and it has continued to today from everything from varieties to agronomic practices to improve profitability and sustainability.
Well, when you speak of the disease wheat scab, it was very, very disastrous because a large percentage of the crop was wiped out, correct?
It was devastating, yes.
So we've got an economic impact to the farmer, but also the people that transport the wheat, the people that process the wheat, and then of course the millers, and then the end consumer.
And ag retail, the entire rural economy in Minnesota is based on ag.
And in fact, there's places in Minnesota and other regions that grew wheat that still never recovered the wheat acres from that time.
That is correct. Soybeans and corn have moved north, displacing acres, but wheat is still a predominant, one of the big 3 crops. As we get into cover crops, weed resistance issues, it's gaining some traction again as a rotational crop, and it's a predominant crop in the state of Minnesota.
Very much so. And some of the dollars from the checkoff actually go to develop export markets too, don't they?
They do. Working on developing export markets and domestic markets. One of the objectives is to develop and nurture those relationships that are necessary to export those products.
So with wheat export, about what percentage of our production goes to a different place than the United States?
It's pretty close to 50-50. 50% domestic, and for spring wheat specifically, our growers are producing mill quality is the objective. So a large portion of that is being exported or going to bakers.
Half is a big deal. So if something happens in that export market to disrupt it, it does cause some concern, doesn't it?
A lot of concern, yes. There's a lot of, and that's why, in this trying time right now with trade markets and everything, it's why we were very excited to see the Japanese agreement, and at least in principle, coming out. We're waiting to see those details firm up, but that is an exciting deal. They are traditionally our #1 trading partner by value. When we get to #1 by volume is 1 and 2 is usually Canada and Mexico, the passage of USMCA. Hopefully that appears to be marching its way through the legislative process. We're urgently looking forward to that being implemented.
Well, it's no small feat to be a huge exporter of wheat when you're so far inland as Minnesota is, so keep up the good work.
Yes.
You have also some training and educational opportunities for members. Can you expand on that, like the peer group?
Oh, yes. The peer group is we work with other partners. Farm Bureau, corn, soybean growers in Minnesota are all supporting. And the idea is to develop leadership and young leadership. We're getting to, whether it's the Minnesota wheat growers, the council, school boards, township boards, everyone's always looking for board members. Term limits are always coming up. Do we do away with term limits? Because it's so hard to find qualified replacements for those. So we're working with the peer group trying to develop the next generation into eventually those roles. It's ag focused, but not ag exclusive. We have producers, ag retail, ag journalism individuals are in there, and the idea is it's centered around ag, but to learn about themselves, public speaking skills, the importance of community, the importance of ag in the region, and really it's a personal development and community development project.
Well, what kinds of future endeavors do you see happening inside of your organization?
The rate of change is only increasing, and I'm relatively new, been on the job since June 1st, so we're developing those strategic plans now over this winter to really look at the next 3 to 5 years. But I think projects like this, the ARB on the Farm, where we're doing that urban outreach, I really see our goal having 2 distinct camps. One, supporting the grower and being sustainable, both environmentally, economically, and community. The other being that market development, which includes urban outreach, educating the consumer, because there are so many, whether it's GMO, CRISPR, organic, there's terms to everything that's being used in marketing to drive those marketing dollars to get those consumers to buy companies' products. Not all of it is. There's a lot of confusion out there. Educating the consumer to where they're knowledgeable and can make those decisions and realize that whether it's a farmer in Minnesota or a consumer in Minneapolis, both groups are concerned about healthy food for children, sustainable environment for the long run. We're after the same thing. We just need to communicate that and get rid of the fear.
Well, thank you for the support for the Landscape Arboretum and the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
"19 ethanol plants dot Minnesota's landscape, converting millions of bushels of corn into fuel. Minnesota motorists have burned the fuel for years, and in recent years, ethanol has become increasingly valued as an export item. 15 Middle Eastern and African government officials and ethanol buyers came to Minnesota to learn more about the ethanol value chain from field to fuel.
They started out at the Global Ethanol Summit in Washington, D.C., where they're trying to learn about opportunities through policy and then also the physical plant, how that works with being able to get ethanol into their marketplace.
Ethanol has been the fastest growing U.S. agricultural export for the last 10 years, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Foreign Agricultural Service. In 2018, U.S. ethanol exports totaled more than 1.7 billion gallons, equal to about 609 million bushels of corn, valued at $2.7 billion. Much of the demand came from oil-producing regions like the Middle East.
We had the Paris Climate Accord. That's really driven a lot of these countries to meet the climate mandates. And one of the easiest ways to reach that is through ethanol. Helps reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that was one of the quickest ways they can meet the goals.
The delegation visited the Quick Trip blending facility near Rochester. They also toured farms, refineries, and retail outlets to learn more about how ethanol is made and transported.
Yeah, it will be interesting for them to see all the value chain from corn to the ethanol for this delegation, and to understand very well how ethanol is produced, how it's blended, and how it will use it for the engine and for the cars.
From Minnesota corn standpoint and national corn, we've set new records in ethanol exports over the past 3 years, and we can continue to see that being driven by mandates to reduce petroleum use. And so as we see mid-level ethanol blends continue to grow, we see more ethanol exports.
This is Dan Lemke reporting.
We've had a terrifyingly good time here at Willows Keep Farm. Thanks for joining us. See you next time on Farm Connections.